Alright YouTube, how's it going? Welcome back to the channel. So today guys, we are gonna talk about the hand trap tier list. So we already did the meta tier list a week back, so now we're gonna categorize some hand traps on 4 categories here. So if they are really main deck worthy, if they are situational, and if it's really up to you if you want to use these hand traps in your deck. And lastly, if they are plainly not usable with the current season that is in Master Duel. So first and foremost, we have a couple here. To start off, we have DD Crow. So DD Crow, I would say it's much better if you'll use Bishos, and even Bishos is kind of like of a 50-50 card. But for the sake against the Bishos, I think Bishos is much more usable than DD Crow. Having to banish a card is typically not a problem typically, but with the current meta of Kashtiras, I think it's not gonna be like really reliable by far, because they can just get a hold of those banished cards with the help of Theosis and a copy of the Birth. So I'm just gonna put DD Crow on don't use basically for the current season. Then we have next our Max C, really good staple as well, even with the current meta nowadays. I think these with Ash Blossom and Imperm are the 3 best staples and really good hand traps nowadays for Master Duel, even before. So I'm just gonna put them directly here as main deck worthy hand traps. Then we have Skullmeister. Skullmeister, not really good. It's much better if you'll use a copy of the Bishos for a banish or Call by the Grave for a negate. So typically, although the information of negating a card in the graveyard is kind of good, but I don't really see anything that is beneficial with the effect of Skullmeister. So I'm just gonna put this one as don't use. Then you have Cypher Gear Gamma. Now Gamma is kind of, I would say it's kind of like of a 50-50 use. Because if this was on 3 copies with the 1 driver, I think this would be really good as a main deck worthy card. But since we're just using semi-limited Gamma, I think this is going to be like situational, because you will evidently draw into or get a copy of driver during your starting hand or even in your draw. So basically you'll already have like a brick on hand for that matter. Now I know some other Kashtira decks are using the Black Meteor Dragon or Red Ice Black Meteor Dragon to dump a copy of the driver from the deck to the graveyard, which is kind of good as well. So that's an easy access to removing one of the bricks in your deck. But the problem here is typically the 2 copies of Gamma, which is really hard to pull in most of your 40 card decks. So I'm going to put this one as situational, or basically as preference if you want to use this card in your deck. But don't get me wrong, it is still a really good card. Then you have Red Reboot. Red Reboot, I'm going to put this one as preference, because you can go for main deck worthy for Red Reboot, but as of now, currently, I really thought that Kashtira was going to be like, after a week or so, people are just going to go back to some of the meta decks like Branded's, Rikas and Avalon, Yearly's, some decks like that. But I was wrong. So typically people are still spamming Kashtiras in the current meta. So I'm just going to put this one as preference if ever you want to use it. No, don't get me wrong. This is still a really good card to go up against Labyrinth or any trap-based decks, especially stun decks, which is very frequent in Duelist Cup or even in Ranked nowadays. So I'm thinking this is going to be like a preference in most of your decks. Side decking it would be somewhat good as well. I think in tournaments, this would be a really good card. Then you have Effect Veiler. I think Effect Veiler is kind of like a preference of yours. If you want to use it in your deck, you'll have more chances of using a copy of Imperm during your turn, because basically if you draw a copy of Effect Veiler during your draw phase or in your second turn, typically you already have a brick on hand. So much better if you'll have a copy of Imperm rather than a copy of Effect Veiler. Then you have Shifter. Shifter is always going to be a situational card, having to be used in Kashtira's, Exo-Sisters, or even Luanderies. So I'm not going to put this one as a main deck worthy card, but it's typically good in some of the decks, but not all. Then you have a copy of Drulin Lockbird. So Drulin Lockbird, before I was putting this one as don't use, but now it is really one of the best main deck worthy cards to go up against Purelys or even Kashtiras, because these 2 tier 1 decks are basically garnering more card advantage for each of their card effects. So having to stop them from adding more cards to their hand is going to be very beneficial for you and garnering you a win against those tier 1 decks. So I'm going to put Drill and Lock as a main deck worthy card. Then we have Snow Rabbit. So Snow Rabbit is kind of like, it's kind of 50-50 as well. So I'm going to put this one as a preference. Now don't get me wrong, Snow Rabbit is a really good card and it is usually good against Sprite decks, but I haven't seen Sprite decks currently in some of the ranked games, but I've seen them most of the time in the Duelist Cup. But it's really up to you if you want to use them. Preferably if you want to remove some back rows, typically just go with a copy of Harpy's Flare Duster or a copy of Lightning Storm to remove those back rows and not depend too much of Snow Rabbit. But yeah, that's Snow Rabbit for you. Then you get a copy of Evenly Matched, really good main deck worthy card. Basically, with the current meta nowadays with Pureleys, Kashiras, and even Labyrinths, or any trap decks for that matter, I think Evenly Matched is one of the good cards to remove some of the problematic cards that you will encounter for these type of decks, and this will level up the field to your own. So a really good card as a main deck worthy card. Then you have Moonlit Chill. Moonlit Chill, I would say, as preference as well, same as Snow Rabbit. Moonlit Chill, although the effect for negation and burn is kinda really fun or really usable, but if you want for negate, just go for Imperm. I think that would be somewhat beneficial. But in a tournament base, I think this would be somewhat good side decking this card. Then you have Bestials, like I said earlier. I think this is gonna be like situational because this is much more useful against light and dark decks, which is in the current format or the current meta nowadays for Master Duel. People are just spamming Kashiras, so not always you're gonna have or see light and dark monsters in the graveyard. So typically you're just gonna depend light and darks on your own graveyard. And I think the best deck to use Vicious on is still gonna be Branded as well. So there are some other good cards as well, like Labyrinth that you can target for Banish, also for Mathmex. But for Mathmex, I think it's rarely that you can find light and darks, because most of the time you'll have or see some other builds wherein they're using Ignisters in their build as well. But yeah, really good card or situational if you are using some specified decks as well. Then you have Nibiru, really good main deck worthy card. I do prefer running 1 or 2 copies in some of my decks for Nibiru. As long as you have a copy of Nibiru, this is still a really good board breaker as well. If ever your opponent keeps on spamming some boards, or if ever you drop a backseat and you get a copy of Nibiru. So this is an insanely good card as well to even out the field. Then you have Winter Cherries. Winter Cherries, I'm going to put this one as don't use. Now, Winter Cherries is kind of good if you're going up in a tournament. So knowing the decks of your opponent, you can just easily pick off some of the boss monsters that your opponent has typically. But in some cases in rank or in the Duelist Cup, which most of the decks are kind of random, so you don't know what the decks to go up against. So I think this is going to be really bad if you're going to use this one in your deck. Then you have Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion. I think the best card, other than using a copy of Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion, is using a copy of Call by the Grave, having to negate that card if they are trying to use an effect monster in the graveyard. But like the Snow Rabbit and the Moonlit Chill, it's kind of like on your preference going up against these type of cards. But anyways, those are the hand traps that I managed to pick off from the MasterDuelMeta.com. And tell me your thoughts in the hand trap tier list. Do you want to move some of the hand traps in some other categories? Tell me in the comment section below, and I would like to hear your opinion as well. I'll see you guys in the next video. Keep safe, good luck, and like and subscribe, guys. Goodbye.